Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to Glass Academy Webinars 2024 series, where innovation meets inspiration in the world of glass. We are thrilled to kick off this year's series with a topic on demand, walkthrough of glass in architecture from design to installation. Today, we have the honor of hosting a renowned architect, Pradeep Varma, Principal Architect Ar.Pradeep Architects and Architectural Practice based out of Chennai. Architect Pradeep is a highly experienced architect with a passion for creating positive and impactful spaces. A graduate of IIT Roorkee, he is a registered member of COA and an associate member of IIA, where he previously served as Joint Secretary of the Chennai chapter. He is also a member of Indian Green Building Council, IGBC. Beyond practice, Architect Pradeep is passionate about architecture's impact. He is a visiting faculty at multiple architecture schools, a founding member of the Chennai Architecture Foundation, and an advisor and a consultant of the IIT Madras Research Park. He also mentors startups in the IIT MRP ecosystem, fostering the next generation of architects. As principal architect of Varsha and Pradeep Architects, Architect Pradeep champions responsible design that fosters physical and psychological well-being. He believes in a collaborative approach, valuing inputs from all stakeholders for a truly holistic design solution. When not shaping spaces, Architect Pradeep is a passionate cricketer and a founding member of Wild Hawks Cricket Club. He is also a voracious nonfiction reader, particularly interested in the intersection of science and spirituality, while history, music, poetry rounds his diverse interests. So welcome, Architect Pradeep. We are delighted to have you here with us today, and we are looking forward to sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience to our webinar series.
Pleasure to be here.
So before diving into today's webinar's topic, let's take a moment to reflect back on your journey as an architect. Can you please share with us what initially drew you to the field of architecture and inspired you to pursue a career in this field?
So as often happens in life, I landed up in architecture by chance. So when I was applying for my Roorkee form, I don't remember the reason why, but I put architecture as my third choice. After those days, computer science, electronics used to be the top requirements. So when I got my rank, I had a pretty decent rank, but not decent enough to get me computer science or electronics. So I ended up in architecture. Though at that point in time, I pretty much wanted to be an engineer. Okay. So it's another story how I when I went to Roorkee, I joined the Department of Architecture. I think there are many influences that kind of convinced me that this is a very beautiful profession. And thankfully, I have no regrets looking back on it. But it was purely chance.
That's wonderful. It's actually interesting to hear the authentic answer because most of us have the same question about why did we actually land up in architecture. So I think most of the audience would definitely resonate with this. So can you share with us some memories of your experiences in your college days? As most of our audience today will be students, then be enthusiastic to understand what the school of architecture shaped your perspective in the approach of the fields.
So I think few things stand out in my experience as a student of architecture. One significant fact was that our Department of Architecture was part of a larger engineering university, which was heavily engineering focused. So therefore, my tenure as a student in the Department of Architecture Roorkee was very influenced by engineering, the engineering side of the profession, which is also in a very significant side of the profession. And not only within the department, but also the fact that our hostel was full of engineers from diverse fields. And you lived with them, you ate with them, you sat with them, you played with them, and you shared and discussed with them. So most of us, what I significantly find that most graduates from Roorkee, at least in that generation, I don't interact too much now, used to be very strong in the engineering side of the profession. So we grew up with a very strong engineering base, whether it is structure or the MEP side of stuff, or even materials. We had a much better knowledge base than most other architects who were coming from other schools, which were standalone schools of architecture. So that was one significant thing which I experienced. The second thing was, of course, the culture of that time, which is I would say to an extent, a problem I see with the way architecture is taught now. It's become very siloed. In our time, they were still ragging around. So it kind of broke down the barriers between the seniors and the juniors during the ragging period itself. And thankfully,
Inspiring.
the ragging was not intense like it is. And I understand why ragging is banned, but it kind of helped dissolve and create bondages, not bondage in that sense, bonding, not bondage.
Bonding. Yes.
Yeah. The second thing was that at that time, because computers were there, there was a very strong culture of working in the studios. So the prevalent culture in our college was that the thesis students who were in fifth year would each adopt 4 or 5 students from all the junior batches, starting from fourth, third, second, first, who will work as a team for the senior batches. So we would always, during the thesis semester, be attached to some thesis studio, and we would literally live our life in the studio during that semester. So you
Correct.
finished your classes and you work for the seniors, and so you got to see works across the spectrum right up till what thesis students do. So a lot of learning happened through imbibing it informally rather than being taught formally. So at
Yes.
least for a guy like me, it made a big difference because when we came to that in classes, I felt I was always 2 steps ahead when what was being taught because a lot of that I was exposed to when I was working for the thesis students. So those, I think, I mean, of course, besides the usual fun of being in a hostel life and being on your own, I was just 17 when I went to college. So all that nonsense and fun is very much part of any hostel life. But these were, I would point out from an architectural point of view, which I found helps significantly shape how I turned out as an architect.
So, were there any influential mentors or professors now that you've spoken about the exchange of information between seniors, juniors, and as a unit, an architectural unit? So, were there any influential mentors or professors who played a significant role in shaping your career path? If
Yes,
yes, how
yes,
did their
definitely.
guidance impact your development?
Like I told you, I landed up in architecture by chance. And in fact, I remember my father, because I had admissions in Pilani and a few other places, and my father asked me, "Do you want to stay in this?" Because it originally came as a shop. So I told him to just hang on a day or two, I'll let him know. And I went to the department, and there I was immediately, during ragging, absorbed by one of our seniors as part of his thesis team, a guy called Girish Ramnathan. He now practices in Bangalore, is a very good friend. So I remember the first few days while having conversations with Girish, I expressed my confusion about architecture. And I remember having a couple of very long conversations with him where he told me what architecture was. And because I didn't even know what architecture was, frankly, when I went, right? So he kind of talked to me and let me know and showed me some stuff of what does an architect do. And during those conversations, I realized that, yeah, this is a very holistic way of looking at, even if you want to be an engineer, this is very holistic engineering, where you're looking at, from creation till completion, not just in one domain. Most engineering domains tend to be slightly straitjacketed and blinkered, but architecture was kind of more holistic. And that was something that appealed to my soul. And therefore, I stuck around. So that was the first big influence. The second, of course, was a professor called Professor Shankar, who kind of taught us design in first year. And there was a Professor R.K. Sahu, who taught us principles of design in the first year, second year. Professor Shankar taught us few other subjects. So these two professors were very passionate professors. Professor Sahu, of course, was a very senior professor at that time. Professor Shankar was younger. They were really kind of taught architecture in a way where you realize the impact it has on human beings, on the overall environment. And it was somewhere during that time, I think I will be articulating it much better. I don't think I had that level of clarity of thought then. But what I remember I came away with during those interactions was that architecture impacts human beings all the time, right? You live 100% of your life in an architecturally designed space, and that's the power architecture has. And somehow, though I wasn't so clear about it as I'm now, that message kind of somewhere at a subconscious level stuck and really got me interested in architecture as a profession and as a what should I say, medium.
So it sounds like your college experience has a profound impact on your development as an architect. So, moving on, could you tell us when you started your own firm and what motivated you to take that step in your career? Because when I speak to young architects, they're actually very scared to take that big step of starting their own firm and believing in what they do. So,
So again, it is a bit of chance. No doubt, I was always interested in starting my own firm, partly because of the creative freedom your own firm gives you, plus also because I worked for almost 7 years before started. I graduated in 1990 and our firm was established in 1997. So I worked in two, three different firms before starting our practice. So while there was always this background desire, if I may say so, to start our own firm, it wasn't as if I was fixated on it. But what happened over the course of 7 years, as I worked across and kind of matured as an architect post college, I realized that I had very specific thoughts and philosophies on what I thought about architecture as, and I did not find firms that fully resonated with that philosophy. Um, there were firms where I did enjoy working, especially the last one where I worked, which was KSM Architecture, where Sriram Ganapati, me, and Varsha, we all part working together at the same time at one point in time. Um, but because I had this development, if I may say so, on my philosophies as an architect, that kind of nudged me. One, two, certain things happened by chance that led to the start of a practice, which maybe I can recount separately. But yeah, that's kind of 1997 totally forced my hand and I had to start.
right. So, in this journey, were there any pivotal projects or turning moments in your career, in your initial years, that help you define your goals and aspirations as an architect for future? Like,
Yeah, so like I just mentioned in the previous question, so in 1997, I was freelancing also in my evening hours, making drawings for some builders, and one of those builders introduced me to a larger construction developer company. And just so that I can, they were looking for some younger architects to do some of the smaller projects. And when I was waiting in the room of the president of the company to meet them, I saw a survey drawing of a large project kept on his table. So I kind of, during the conversation, asked him, "What is this project?" He said, "This is too big for you." Okay,
right,
don't even have an office. So I said, "Yeah, I know that, but what do you lose? You take a proposal and then you take a call." So he was very intrigued by that, and he said, "Okay, fine," because we were competing with two, three of the very large firms in Chennai at that time. So he said, "Okay, but I will not pay you for the design." I said, "That's fine." And we made a proposal, Varsha and I, and we gave it to him. And then they had a problem because they loved it. So they said that, "Okay, will you sell your design to us? We'll pay you for the design, but we will get it done by one of the big architects because we don't think, I mean, you don't even have an office and we don't want to take that kind of a risk." So then I hedged my second bet. I said, "Okay, do me a favor. Anyway, you'll have to go for an approval stage. Only then can you start construction. So sign me up till the approval stage. That is something very, very I can do. I can create approval drawings for you. And that will give me 3, 4 months till you get the approval to set up an office. And you come and inspect. If you don't think my setup is good enough, then don't award me. I'll sell my design. But if you're convinced, then you have to sign up." So he was very intrigued by this. So I said, "Okay, fine, you're on." So that's how it happened. And that's how we kind of had to set up our office. So that's how the first name
that's
was.
yes, wonderfully inspiring to have that courage to ask that question. So, yes,
That's an interesting thing that that project never took off after approval stage. There was some
oh,
problem, and by then we had quit and I'd started our office. So then, like they say, you're thrown into deep waters, then you have to figure out how to swim.
how to
So
swim.
we figured out how to swim, and that's how it's going. I think the second turning point happened somewhere about 7, 8 years later, where we got two large projects. I think this was around about 2008, I think maybe 10 years later. Uh, we got a SEZ project for Platinum Holdings, which is Navlur, and we also competed in an invited competition for the Great Lakes campus, which is in Madamai, which was supposed to be a platinum rated green building. That was not something that they had wanted, but they had just called 6, 7 of the biggest firms. And by luck, we kind of got an invite for that because we just happened to know somebody there. And we competed in that, and they really liked our design. And I must commend Dr. Bala, who was the founding dean of Great Lakes, who's no more, unfortunately, but he literally went against the advice of the entire board. And being an educationist, he kind of took a chance with us. And he said so very much on the board that I know we are taking a chance. And this was in my presence, he said, because the board called me back to kind of have a discussion that, how do we trust such a young firm for such a large project? It was almost a 15-acre campus to be done within 1 year. So I gave my reasons, and people were still apprehensive. There was a 10-member board then, I remember. And Dr. Bala at the end of the day say, I trust this guy. Let's go ahead. And that was a significant moment. And after that, that kind of catapulted us to much larger projects, also gave us the exposure. So I would say that was the second biggest turning point, where it kind of gave us also confidence that we belong in that league and we can perform in that league. We did. We're still working for Great Lakes for the last 12 years continuously. We've been doing work for them. So I guess
that's
that
truly
was.
inspiring. Yes. So now that we've established this as a principle of your own firm, can you share a few words about the specific concepts or principles that you personally like to follow while designing? So what sets your practice apart in terms of approach or philosophy to the others? So what's a strong philosophy?
So one of the things that I personally believe that people in life take their career too seriously. Right? So you are not born to pursue a career. You are born to live a life. Right? You are born to make something of yourself as a human being, as a person. That is the fundamental objective of life. Career is just a medium to achieve that. So when I look at architecture, before I even come to design, which is an end product of a design of an architectural process, the fundamental reason I think the way I look at architecture, to me, architecture is a tool for self-development. That is the way I look at my work, my career, and architecture as a profession. Every architect, according to me, should fundamentally work in the kind of architecture which helps in their self-realization. What kind of an architect am I? Where, if you want to answer that question, what kind of architect am I? What beliefs I have in architecture is a fundamental exploration of who you are as a person, right? Now, if you don't have a clear answer to that question, then you will flounder around in different styles and different trends, and you will go with the flow rather than create the flow, right? So you will not be leading, but you will be the follower, right? So fundamentally, I think architects or any person, frankly, in any career, should fundamentally use the career not as the primary objective of life, but as a tool to achieve the primary objective of life, which is self-realization, right? So that's according to me, a significant distinction on how I approach things and my profession. Okay. Now, as a part of that philosophy, I truly believe that architecture is a commercial art, right? I realize my place in society. We are all cogs in the wheel of this giant wheel called society and culture, and history being the more macro part of it. We all do our small little contributions in these small little lives and go away. So I understand that I'm a commercial artist. I'm not a fine artist. I don't make a building as per my taste and then put it out on the market and say somebody likes this building, buy it, like a painter would or a sculptor would. Even they are commissioned, but still there is more creative latitude over there. Whereas architecture is meant to be used and lived, not just enjoyed for its aesthetic appeal, like say a sculpture or uh, painting or any form of fine art would be, even say poetry or a book, prose. So that distinction is something I'm very conscious about. It's somebody else's money, somebody else's dreams, somebody else's land that I'm using. The only reason I'm still there in that role is because I have an expertise, which the user does not possess. Right? They have a vision, but they don't have the tools to convert that vision. So it's important for me to be first a very, very good listener. According to me, architecture is made or broken in the first act of listening. End of story. If you listen well, if you're humble, your mind is humble as in creativity and as a person. If you listen genuinely and truly what your site is trying to tell you, what the context is trying to tell you, what the client is trying to tell you, what is their vision, and then yes, you understand all of that with your experience, with your talent, you add to that vision. It should be a collective vision of your client, of the site, of the context, and your creative vision that should co-evolve and kind of generate the final context in which you design. To me, if this process is done, I doubt if there's any architect who's not talented enough to bring a good design. The problem, the point of failure, according to me, why we see mediocre quality of architecture in our world today, not only it's in the world today, and it's always been, is because architects don't listen. Okay. We want to be fine artists. We want to put our egos and say, I am the one who's creative. I am the one this, which I fundamentally disagree. Philosophically, I have a big departure with that kind of architecture. I see that there is a place for it. There are so-called the celebrity architects who create where to whom clients go because they want their kind of architecture. And I find that there's a place in the sun for that too. But that's not the majority of architecture. And so majority of the architects need to very clearly kind of learn to respect the vision of client, the context that in which they are practicing and the site that they are dealing with and respond to that. And that comes from listening. So everything else follows. The rest of the design process is a very simplistic process. That's true for any product, true for any service. There is a need, there is a solution. As problem is in understanding the need. That's where the point of failure in architecture is, or actually in anything is. I mean, it applies to relationships, it applies to life, anywhere. If you understand the need, I think most of us are equipped to find a solution. Problem lies in only figuring out the need. So that's my philosophy.
Absolutely. So thank you, Ar.Pradeep, for sharing your journey with us and providing valuable insights, not only into your journey as a professional, but also as a person. So now let's move on to the webinar topic of the day, walkthrough of glass from sourcing from designing to installation. So firstly, glass with its transparent beauty and versatile properties has long been a symbol of innovation and creativity, making it an indispensable building material today. By understanding the entire process of glass from sourcing to installation, architects can unleash the full potential of this material, creating spaces that are not only visually stunning, but also functional, sustainable, and conducive to the human environment. And not many architects, we don't get chance to interact with most of the architects to understand this process. Design is definitely understood, but the entire step to step, especially for the young architects, is a challenge to where do they begin? How do they understand such a material and implement it on their sites? To firstly begin with, let's start with the first phase of our walkthrough today. So how do you select the type of glass and what factors should architects consider when sourcing glass for their projects?
So again, this comes from what I talked about earlier, the context, right? One of the key things in this case, when you choose any material, leave alone glass, you need to understand you need to understand the material above, right? So first advice I would have is when you're looking at any material, in this case, say glass, you need to understand what are the pros and cons of glass. Number one, glass is transparent, fine, everybody knows that. It allows in a lot of light, great, but it also brings in heat. So you need to understand the con of that. With more light comes heat, right? Simultaneously, there is a certain brittleness to glass, right? There is its sound value is something you can hear through glass more than ordinary glass, especially more than say a 9-inch wall would be. So, and then you can't bend it that easily. There is a cost implication if you want to try too many creative things with it. It comes in very rigid sizes. So therefore, if you want non-standard panels, so there's a cost implication to that. It has limitations of how big it can be. And so you need to understand the product, its pros and its cons. And when it comes to specifically in terms of glass, um, you need to balance the amount of glass you use with your desire for transparency or view, as in case it is an external thing, with the amount of light and heat that you want to get, especially when you're practicing, say, in a tropical country like India, right? That's one of the big mistakes most architects we tend to make, is that we use glass like we see it used in, say, Europe or US, which are temperate countries with a very different climatic situation, right? So if you use that quantum of glass, then you allow in a huge amount of light and a huge amount of heat with it. Then what we do, we end up using special glasses which cost 1 million to mitigate that. But to me, that fundamental approach itself is wrong. So glasses should be selected based on the direction which they are facing. So you get diffuse light from north. Yes, you can use a lot of glass over there, a lot more of glass over there. Whereas the east and west, where the maximum heat comes in, you should kind of reduce the quantum of glass that you use over there. And the south, you can kind of balance your desire again there over there. It's kind of a bit of both. So the orientation matters, the kind of building that you're doing, how much heat. If you have a building which is narrow, then you can do with lesser glass because daylight penetration will reach the building. You don't have to go very tall glasses, but if you're having broader buildings, then you go for taller glasses to allow for deeper daylight penetration. If you're going for buildings which are completely 100% daylit, then you have to mitigate the glass accordingly. Okay, but if you're going, say, for a residence, then there's no point having these huge glasses. So yeah, a lot of depends on the typology of the building, the orientation, the climate in which you're designing, the other functional aspects. Like, for example, we did a hotel and the Vanagaram Junction. Now there's a flyover there. So there's a lot of sound there. So the choice of the kind of glass you have to also has to depend on the amount of acoustic that you have to generate within the room. So the acoustic properties that you want to have. Then, of course, the design, whether you have straight glass, you have bent glass, you're doing something funky with the glass, you're trying to create an effect, or whether you're using it in interior case where you want to use different colored glasses, stuff like that. So you have to use the entire palette of functional parameters of glass to then choose which is the right glass in your scenario. And for that, you need to understand not only glass as a product, you need to also understand the full range of issues you're dealing with in your design. Okay, so that's how you would end up probably selecting a
Correct.
glass.
So once the decision of the type of the glass is made, I think selecting the supplier involves considering factors beyond just glass quality and the price they assure. So what other steps do you take while choosing a glass supplier for most of your projects?
Quite frankly, we don't have too many options in glass because it's such a capital intensive industry that now there are not too many players in it. Uh, Having said that, I mean, on a generic note, uh, most of the players in the glass industry are large organizations who have been doing it for a while, and therefore there's not too much difference in the quality of the product that you get. I think what is a differentiator is the technical capability. Uh, One of the problems with glass is that though you have certain IS codes and certain NBC standards, it is still not as standardized and understood like many other conventional and older products like concrete, brick, stone are understood. Today, you can't go to a structural engineer and ask him to advise you on the glass. It is the glass company who has to advise you, and the structural engineer can only kind of validate that. That's the way the practice is. So your glass supplier has to be somebody who has a very strong technical background or capability that you can trust. That is important. You can trust them, right? Because we are, as like I like to say often, we are generalists. We are like a general physician. We understand all parts of the body. We are not a specialist in any one thing except design. We are like a jack of all trades, but master of design, right? So we depend on our consultants for a lot of our technical inputs, and also vendors and suppliers. And glass happens to be one of those products where you're very heavily dependent on your supplier to engineer it correctly. Okay. Of course, you need to have working knowledge as an architect where you're able to make out whether the advice that you've got is right or not. And some of that comes with experience, of course. But the ability to trust your supplier to me is one of the most important technically. Then, of course, the ability to execute, because glass is such a refined product, if I may say so. Even 1 mm here and there matters. It is important that the execution bandwidth that your supplier creates, the kind of processors that they have, the kind of installers that they have, are people who are equally adept technologically and are sound technically to kind of execute the design. Okay, so that is an important criteria. So we definitely select vendors who have good installers, who have certified installers, who have gone through a certain process of training and have a certain minimum quality, internal quality standard. Okay, so that's a very important criteria when you select your final contractor for executing the glass. Those two, I think, would matter.
Absolutely. And are there any specific projects of yours where your client's requirement demanded or challenged the conventional use of glass, like how we were talking about as a building material, kind of pushed your boundaries for innovation, design strategies that you actually generated right there for that project to be made?
Your own office, your head office at Egmore, which we did, I think, in 2010 or 11, I forget.
Saint-Gobain's, sir.
Saint-Gobain's head office in Sigapiachi building. I remember Santanam's brief was that everything has to be with glass, because that time Saint-Gobain had only got glass as a major item in its portfolio. Now, of course, you have expanded to a lot of other products. But so during there, if you visited your head office, you would see that all the tabletops are with glass. That was the first time I think we had used tabletops for the furniture with glass. It's still not actively used in the industry as such, but your entire office is tabletops with glass. And we did a lot of research with Herman Miller, who has supplied the entire modular understructure. And we did mock-ups and sampling to engineer the right quantum of glass, the quality of glass that we would require, the right amount of frosting that would happen, which will give us privacy on the tabletop, and it can function as a tabletop. So, and then we have used glass on the ceiling there. We have used glass in as many ways as we could.
Yes.
And of course, there are a couple of places where we use a lot of bent glass, and we have used curvilinear glass. In one of the interior fit outs we did, we use a glass floor. In a discotheque area and a cafeteria, we have used glass staircases. Okay, that was quite an interesting challenges that we have had. So yeah, we have enjoyed working with glass as a product, pushing its boundaries to see what all we can do with it. Yes, those are some of the projects.
Yeah. It's absolutely, for me, fascinating to see the evolution of glass as a building material that has a scope for innovation and design. So now let's move on to the final phase of our walkthrough, if I may say, is the installation process. So can you walk us through the various steps involved in installing architectural glass from site preparation to final inspection, that it is on point, as you said, it's a very delicate material, 1 mm here and there, it's going to create a
So to me, the make or break of the installation process is the shop drawings, right? So once the basic intent is set down by the architect and the selection of glass has been done and the schematic drawing has been made by us, we expect the vendor to make a detailed shop drawing of how they're going to execute it, right? What kind of uh, structural backing will be provided, what is the spacing, the sizes, the wastage is optimizing the wastage of the glass. So how do you size the glass so that there's optimum wastage? What is, especially in case of facade glasses, curtain glazings, or any other form of glazing, how do you mitigate leakages? How do you handle the functional aspects of it, the sealants, the drainage systems? All that has to be captured accurately in the shop drawing. Because once you get the shop drawing right, then I think 90% of the mistakes are finished there. Right? It's only when you don't get into the process of making shop drawing and checking it, and you take a shortcut and say, okay, let's just go ahead based on the schematic drawing, that the mistakes tend to happen. Okay. So to me, every architect should insist on a shop drawing, whether it's for exterior glass or interior glass, even if you're doing as simple thing as a planelline glass cladding on a wall. So what sizes are you going for? What is the thickness of the glass? Is that thickness of the glass adequate for that size, or do you need to give an additional support in the middle? How are you pasting it using a double side tape? Are you pasting the tape at the regular intervals? Are you getting too much gap in between? From understanding fundamental things like that. And that should all be captured on paper and should be signed both by the supplier and the executor and the architect, so that the execution team then has a very clear blueprint to follow. It is not left to their ad hoc decisions at site, which is where the quality compromises and tend to happen. Sometimes they are not necessarily with any intent of either subverting the quality or saving costs. It is just because there is no clarity and that person doesn't have the technical knowledge to make an informed decision. So therefore, insisting on a shop drawing to me is the most important and the first step that mitigates most of the problems. Thereafter, once you have shop drawing, a routine check by both the architects or the PMC team, or even, like I mentioned earlier, the internal quality team of the executor themselves, all they have to do is look at the shop drawing and look at the actual execution and see whether it's going as per drawing. If it's not going as per drawing, immediately get it corrected or question it, right? So then the checking process becomes easy for anybody. Anybody can just go and check it. But if you don't have a approved shop drawing, then it becomes up in the air, right? So that's, to me, is the way to handle issues on a site.
The primary concentrations before we.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when we talk about installation, in general, the first and foremost thought is about the safety considerations, like how do we handle glass on site. There comes the structural support requirements, like you were rightly mentioning, that every different space demands a different kind of structural support a glass needs to hold for. So could you please also further little more elaborate on different types of structural support systems that you commonly use for most of your glass installations, like the ones that you have explored? It can be areas like roof glazing, glass facades, like you mentioned, curtain walls, railing, skylights. So anything that you can specify the technical side of it, the advantages and the limitations.
So very broadly speaking, without getting into too much technical
Yes.
stuff, the fact is that you have largely two kinds of support systems, a metal support system and a non-metal support system, right? So in a metal support system, you have MS, you have aluminum, right, as the two main contenders. And depending on your cost and the finesse that you're looking at and the kind of application, you either plump for aluminum or you go for MS. So typically in skylights or much larger spans, you may end up using MS because it has a much stronger durability and ability to span much larger spans for a much cheaper cost. That being the driving, it's not that aluminum cannot be strong, it's just that the section sizes become bigger and therefore more expensive. Okay, so you kind of choose between MS and aluminum depending on cost versus span versus util function, strength that you need. But for most applications in glass, aluminum does the job pretty well. It's only in very special condition that we use MS. Uh, Largely because aluminum gives you much better control, much better dimensional tolerance. It's much lower the tolerance in aluminum. Therefore, and the sections can be also slimmer and thinner, so they can look more elegant than say MS. They of course take finish much better. The powder coating or the anodizing on MS tends to look a little better than, sorry, on aluminum tends to look much better than MS. So we invariably end up choosing aluminum in most of the cases. Of course, the kind of aluminum system where you go for a curtain wall system or you go for a framed structure, that depends largely on aesthetics and the overall design of the look and feel part of it. And there's no hard and fast rule that you have to choose one over the other. It's a purely an aesthetic decision. Okay. Uh, and you can pretty much design the aluminum depending on which kind of look and feel that you want. Uh, Coming to non-metal, then you basically have either some form of structural sealants, or you have plywood backings, or you have again aluminum coming on the interior application where you use thinner aluminum framework within interior applications to mount your glass with, double side tape or in rare cases structural sealant and so on and so forth. So there, of course, the engineering is slightly different. You don't have that kind of wind loads. You just have to bother about the flexure of the glass so it doesn't, you don't end up using very large panel for its thickness. And so that on impact, it should not break or get damaged. So you choose the glass accordingly. If you're going for large panels, you toughen the glass. Nowadays, even planelette glass and interior application glasses are available in toughened. So, and then you choose the kind of framing system, the backing system, depending on the kind of interior application you have. So you can use plywood, like I said, or aluminum framework, or just a tape to fix it. So that depends on the kind of application that you have.
So thank you, Ar.Pradeep, for shining a light on the intricacies of glass from design to installation. So before we close today's webinar, for all our young and upcoming architects and designers to know, you mentioned that there's no specification or standardization yet that's profoundly followed in glass, but are there any specific codes or regulations that they can refer to as a part of it to be followed with respect to the glass, use of glass in different locations and different building typologies? Are there any specifications?
There are codes. There are two IS codes, to the best of my knowledge, that talk about glass and standards related to glass. The NBC, the National Building Code itself, has a section on glass. I think it comes under the materials section, and there's a separate section called glass and glazing. And it's a very good read for anybody who wants to understand glass. It kind of has a clear set of definitions where you get to understand all the terminologies related to glass, and it also gives general do's and don'ts and general guidelines on glass and different applications of glass. So I would, for any person who wants to kind of do a kind of a beginner kind of an understanding, 25 pages of NBC is a very good read. Unfortunately, beyond that, because glass is still such an evolving material, there are no one source which I would say where one can just go and kind of get a complete lowdown on glass. Maybe that's where I'm in this webinar, where it'll help. I think webinars like this, which are available, can really dispense more information about glass. And I would recommend that going forward, because my talk is still quite general, maybe you can go into specific kinds of glasses and have people talk about specific kinds of glasses and focused sessions so that people can possibly hear those webinars and understand a specific application. And maybe the industry, like players like you, can come forward and kind of release a booklet on glass and its do's and don'ts and its ways and applications, things to look out for, and kind of circulate it to architects. That would be a good start.
Be a great idea, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I'm sure.
that's the need of the hour. But like I mentioned sometime back, Today, for example, if I have a 3 meter by 4 meter panel which I want glazed, and I have a certain acoustic property to be met, and at the same time, I want certain strengthening to be had. I don't have one primer which I can open and say, okay, this length and breadth, this thing, this thickness of glass, this lamination, that toughening gives me the right size. There is no one primer I can go to. So then I have to send you the drawing, and then the glass vendor will do the analysis, because it is still a product. It's a proprietary product, right? Each of you make glass in a different way, and the same thickness of glass may have slightly varying properties depending on who's the manufacturer. So therefore, there is no one way to treat or go to glass. So a little more standardization, like I mentioned, is a need of the hour in the industry. If that can happen and a ready-made primer can come about, like today, I know if it's M20 concrete, M20 concrete means it's 20 megapascals per cubic. That there's a certain definition to it. So there is no clear-cut standard still in glass. So therefore, it does become a bit of a challenge right now.
I'm sure our audience would have bookmarked all the important conversations we had today. So this brings us to the last question for today. So could you share your insights into your learning curve from the beginning of your career to now, associated in working with the glass overall as an evolution in your architectural projects? So additionally, are there any specific tips or hacks that they could crack into, that one advice that could they take forward in every of the project that they could apply when working with glass and in general?
When it comes to glass, I would say if I were to just use one word, then it would be balance, right? When you're using glass, you're always balancing its strength versus the spans that you want, the view you want, with the amount of light you want to get in and the heat you get in, right? The cost versus the functional requirement. If you have acoustic as a property, you want laminated glass, but then it costs more. So at every step, you're trying to balance two conflicting parameters. And that ability to find that balanced decision when it comes to using glass, to me, is the single most important ingredient for success when using glass as a material. That ability to balance. I think that pretty much also is the success mantra for anything in life, right? The ability to balance different conflicting things, whether it's in your profession, it's in your life, relationships, everything. So you can that way say glass is pretty much a reflection of life. That's a good sentence, actually. Yeah.
That's noted. That's noted. So thank you once again for the comprehensive guidance through the entire process, from designing to installation, that we don't generally talk about. So this is an opening conversation to many other bigger conversations, I believe. So your expertise and insights have illuminated the complexities of working with this versatile material, providing us with valuable knowledge that will undoubtedly enhance our audience understanding today. So on behalf of all of us at Glass Academy and Ethos Empowers, we deeply appreciate your valuable time and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Sukhan, thank you for having me.